Evan Dawson moved through the unknown terrain with the quiet confidence of a seasoned explorer. His sharp eyes scanned the horizon as he advanced, his every step deliberate and precise. Weeks of surviving on this hostile planet had honed his instincts, transforming him from a stranded human into a force of nature, capable of adapting to anything. His mission had changed the moment he intercepted the distress call, a cry for help from someone in danger. He wasn't the type to ignore it. The voice had drawn him deep into the unforgiving desert, where the ground shimmered with heat and the cliffs loomed ominously. The signal grew stronger, and soon he spotted the source, a group of alien hunters surrounding their captive, a striking, silver-skinned woman. Bound at the wrists, even from this distance, Evan could see the determination in her eyes. She wasn't just anyone, she was someone important. A princess, perhaps. He could also tell the hunters weren't typical mercenaries. They were highly trained, heavily armed, and ruthless. But Evan wasn't intimidated. He had seen worse. He studied their formation for a moment, silently calculating his approach. When the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the desert, he made his move. With the precision of a predator, he crept toward the group. His blaster drawn, Evan didn't hesitate. The first hunter went down with a single, silent strike. The second barely had time to react before Evan disarmed him, delivering a swift blow that sent him crashing to the ground. By the time the third hunter turned around, it was too late. Evan was on him, subduing him effortlessly. In less than a minute, the hunters were neutralized. Not a sound had disturbed the eerie silence of the desert. Evan approached the captive woman, cutting through her bonds with a practiced hand. As she stood up, her towering form became more apparent, but Evan met her gaze with unwavering calm. "You are free," he said simply, his voice steady. The woman, regale even in her exhaustion, blinked in surprise. "You risked your life for me?" Evan gave her a small nod, scanning the horizon for any signs of reinforcements. "Looked like you could use a hand." "What's your name?" "Zarala," she replied, her voice strong despite her ordeal. "Princess of the Voran." Evan didn't flinch at the revelation. "Then we need to move." Those hunters weren't acting alone. Zarala nodded, her regal demeanor masking the gratitude she felt. As they made their way to safety, Zarala couldn't help but study her rescuer. He was different from the humans she had heard about. He didn't ask for anything in return, didn't seem fazed by her title or the dangers they faced. When they finally found refuge in a cave, Zarala spoke again. "You have done more than save a life." "Human. My captors were part of a much larger plot." Evan glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "I figured as much." Zarala's silver eyes glinted in the dim light. "You may not realize it, but by rescuing me, you've set events into motion that cannot be undone." Evan sat back against the cave wall, watching her carefully. "Whatever's coming, we'll face it. But for now, let's focus on surviving the night." Zarala nodded. But as she settled in, she couldn't shake the feeling that this man was far more than he appeared. And deep down, she knew that the real challenge had only just begun. The next morning, the two of them began their trek across the endless desert. Evan led the way, his senses on high alert for any sign of danger. Zarala walked beside him. There was no longer any need to speak of the threat. Both knew that hunters wouldn't stop until they had her back. Evan was used to relying only on himself, but something about Zarala had drawn him in, beyond the simple need to save her life. He had never been one to follow titles, but the way she carried herself spoke of someone who was used to responsibility, something he could respect. For hours, they moved in silence. The landscape around them was barren, broken only by occasional jagged rocks and shifting dunes. The heat bore down relentlessly, but neither complained. They just kept moving, driven by the unspoken understanding of survival. After a while, they stopped to rest in the shade of a rocky outcrop. Evan handed Zarala some water from his canteen, watching as she drank it gratefully. When she looked up at him, there was something different in her gaze, a hint of curiosity, of something deeper. "You're not like the other humans I've met," Zarala said, breaking the silence at last. Evan raised an eyebrow. "You've met many?" "Enough to know they don't often act without asking for something in return," she replied. "You risked your life for me, and you haven't asked for anything." "Why?" Evan took a slow sip from the canteen before answering. "It's just what I do, helping people survive. I don't need a reason beyond that." Sarala studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. "I can see that. You have the soul of a warrior, but also something more, a protector." Evan didn't respond, but he couldn't help feeling a connection forming between them, a bond that hadn't been there before. She wasn't just a princess to him anymore. She was a person, someone who had suffered, someone who had survived. As they resumed their journey, Sarala began to open up more. She spoke of her home planet, of the responsibilities that weighed on her shoulders as the only heir to the Vor'an throne. She described the ancient prophecies that had guided her people for generations, warning of a time when they would need an outsider, someone who didn't share their bloodline, yet would play a pivotal role in their survival. Evan listened quietly, processing her words. He wasn't sure what any of it had to do with him, but something about the way she spoke made it feel significant. And as the day wore on, he found himself wondering what role he had stumbled into by saving her. It wasn't until dusk, when they found themselves near a strange set of ruins, that things began to shift. The ruins were unlike anything Evan had ever seen before. Tall, spindly structures rising out of the sand like skeletal fingers grasping at the sky. Sarala stopped in her tracks, her eyes widening as she stared at them. "These are from my ancestors," she whispered. "This place is sacred." Evan frowned, glancing around. "What is it?" She didn't answer immediately, but instead walked toward the center of the ruins, her movements deliberate, reverent. As she reached the heart of the ancient site, she knelt, placing her hand on a large stone that bore strange carvings. The moment her fingers touched the stone, a soft glow emanated from it, spreading across the surface like ripples in water. Evan stepped closer, watching as the glow intensified. He could feel something, an energy, a presence that seemed to pulse in the air around them. Sarala's expression had changed, her face now filled with awe and understanding. "This place, it's where the prophecy begins," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The one that speaks of a human who will help save my people." Evan tensed, unease creeping over him. "I'm not part of any prophecy. I just saved you because it was the right thing to do." Sarala looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the soft glow of the stone. "You may not believe it now, but you're more connected to this than you realize. You're not just a protector, Evan. There's something in you, something that's meant to unlock our future." Evan shook his head. "I don't buy into fate, princess." But even as he said the words, the strange energy in the air pressed down on him, making it hard to ignore the weight of the moment. Something was happening, something bigger than either of them. As night fell, Evan realized that the simple act of saving Sarala had set off a chain of events that neither of them fully understood. And for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he could walk away, because, deep down, a part of him wondered if she was right, if he was part of something bigger than himself, something powerful. Night had fully descended by the time Evan and Sarala made camp in the shadow of the ancient ruins. The strange glow from the stone had faded, but the energy lingered in the air, crackling with a quiet intensity that set Evan on edge. As they sat beside the small fire he had built, the silence between them grew heavier. It was no longer the comfortable quiet of two people merely surviving. There was something unspoken between them, something that had shifted with Sarala's revelation about the prophecy. Sarala broke the silence first, her voice soft but firm. "I know you don't believe in the prophecy, Evan, but I can feel it. There's something inside you, something that calls to these ruins, to my people, the energy. It responded to you." Evan leaned back, staring into the fire. "I'm just a man. Sarala, a soldier, maybe a protector, but not some mystical savior. They don't have any special power." "That's where you're wrong," she said. her eyes never leaving him. The power doesn't have to be something you can see. It's something you feel, something you grow into. He shook his head. But her words lingered. The ruins had reacted when they arrived. The stone had glowed, as if acknowledging his presence. It was hard to dismiss that entirely. Still, he wasn't ready to accept that he was part of some ancient prophecy. They lapsed into silence again, but Sarala wasn't finished. "There's something else you need to know," she said after a moment. "The prophecy doesn't just speak of a human. It speaks of a bond, a connection between the Chosen One and the royal bloodline. That bond is supposed to unlock the power we need to survive." Evan frowned, trying to process what she was saying. "What kind of bond are we talking about?" Sarala hesitated, her gaze shifting to the fire. "It's not entirely clear. The texts speak of a deep connection, one of trust, understanding, and something more. It's why the elders of my people were so desperate to find you. They believe this bond is the key to our survival." Evan's chest tightened at her words. He didn't like where this was going. "You're saying you think I'm supposed to?" "What? Become part of your people?" She met his gaze, her eyes steady. "In a way, yes, but it's more than that. It's about unlocking something within both of us. You saved me, Ivan, and I think that's only the beginning." Evan stood up, pacing around the campfire. He didn't want to hear this. He didn't want to believe that his life had somehow become intertwined with this ancient prophecy. He had spent his whole life fighting to stay in control, to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. But this was different. Sarala stood as well, stepping closer to him. "I know it's overwhelming. I feel it too. But the truth is, we're in this together now. Whatever happens next, we have to face it as one." Before Evan could respond, a low rumble echoed through the ruins. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and the stone at the center of the site began to glow again, brighter this time, its light pulsing like a heartbeat. Evan spun around, instinctively reaching for the blade strapped to his side. "What the hell is happening?" Sarala moved toward the glowing stone, her expression filled with awe. "It's the prophecy. It's awakening." The air around them vibrated with an unseen force, and suddenly the stone cracked open, revealing a hidden chamber beneath the surface. Light poured out from the opening, illuminating the entire area with an otherworldly glow. Sarala stepped back, her voice trembling with excitement. "This is it. Ivan, this is what we were meant to find." Evan's instincts screamed at him to run, but something in the light called to him, pulling him toward the chamber. Against his better judgment, he moved closer, peering into the opening. Inside, he saw something he never could have imagined, a large crystal, suspended in mid-air, glowing with an intense energy. It was ancient,
Powerful.
and somehow familiar. As he stepped closer, he felt a strange warmth spread through his body, as if the crystal were reaching out to him, connecting with him. Sarala's voice was barely a whisper as she spoke. "The hidden power. It's within you." Evan stared at the crystal, his heart pounding in his chest. Everything she had said, everything he had tried to deny, it was all true. The prophecy, the bond, the power. It was real. But what did it mean for him? What did it mean for them? Before he could answer his own questions, the crystal pulsed again, sending a shockwave of energy through the chamber. Evan stumbled back, feeling the force of it hit him like a tidal wave. His vision blurred, and for a moment, the world around him faded away. When he regained his senses, he found himself lying on the ground, the crystal still glowing above him. But something had changed. He could feel it inside him, an energy, a power he had never known before. It was as if the crystal had awakened something deep within him, something that had been dormant for years. Sarala knelt beside him, her hand on his arm. "You felt it, didn't you? The power. It's inside you now." Evan looked at her, still trying to comprehend what had just happened. "What is this? What's happening to me?" Sarala's gaze was filled with both awe and fear. "It's the bond. The prophecy is coming true." Evan stood up, His mind racing, the power coursing through him was undeniable, but he still didn't understand what it meant. What am I supposed to do with this? Sarala looked at him, her expression serious. You're supposed to save us. Evan's jaw tightened. He had never asked for this, but now there was no turning back. Whatever this power was, whatever the prophecy meant, he was in it for the long haul, and he would do whatever it took to protect her, to protect them all. The world outside the ancient ruins was no longer calm. The sky darkened, swirling with clouds that moved unnaturally fast, like a storm drawn to the energy now swirling around Evan. He could feel the power within him, growing stronger with each breath he took. It was no longer something foreign, no longer something he feared. It was part of him now, and the bond between him and Sarala seemed to pulse with that same energy. Sarala stood beside him, her expression a mixture of awe and urgency. Evan, the Dominion, they're coming. They must have sensed the power awakening. We don't have much time. He looked at her, and for the first time, he didn't feel like the mere human she had saved. He felt something more, something greater. His senses sharpened, his strength surging as he stood taller, more confident than he had ever been. What are we dealing with? He asked, his voice steady despite the tension rising in the air. Sarala's eyes were focused on the horizon. The Dominion knows about the prophecy. They feared this day, the day a human would unlock the power that could destroy them. They'll send everything they have to stop us. Evan nodded, his mind clear. He had faced danger before, but never like this. Never with so much at stake. He could hear the distant roar of ships as the sky above them darkened further. Dominion forces were approaching, their shadows stretching across the desert like an army of death. The ground rumbled beneath them, shaking as the first wave of enemy forces arrived, a massive mechanized assault unit towering over the landscape like a walking fortress. Evan's heart pounded, but he didn't waver. He glanced at Sarala. Stay close. Sarala shook her head, her silver eyes flashing with determination. No. Evan, we fight together. Before Evan could argue, the first strike came, a barrage of energy blasts from the mechanized unit. Aimed directly at them, Evan moved instinctively, raising his hand as if to shield them, and to his surprise, the blasts veered away, as if the air around him bent to his will. The power coursed through him, faster and stronger than before. He looked at his hand, then at Sarala. She nodded, her expression calm. You're learning. You control the energy now. Evan didn't hesitate. Then let's end this. The battle began in earnest. Dominion soldiers poured from their ships, armed with high-tech weapons designed to crush any resistance. But Evan was no ordinary resistance. As the first wave approached, he unleashed a forceful burst of energy from within, scattering the soldiers like leaves in the wind. His power flared out in waves, and everywhere it touched, the Dominion forces faltered. Sarala fought beside him, her movements graceful and deadly. She wielded an energy blade, slashing through enemies with precision and speed, her own abilities enhanced by their bond. Together, they moved like a single force, a storm of destruction that the Dominion could not withstand. But the real challenge was the mechanized unit, a towering monstrosity that loomed over the battlefield. Its cannons aimed at them. Each blast it fired shook the ground, sending shockwaves through the ruins. Evan gritted his teeth, feeling the weight of the battle pressing down on him. The power inside him burned like fire, but he wasn't sure how much more he could take. Sarala was at his side in an instant. You can do this. Ivan, I believe in you. Her words steadied him. He closed his eyes, focusing on the energy flowing through him. The bond between them pulsed, stronger than ever. He could feel Sarala's presence in his mind, her strength flowing into him. With a deep breath, Evan opened his eyes and faced the mechanized unit. He raised both hands, summoning every ounce of the power within him. The ground beneath his feet trembled as the energy gathered, a force so powerful it distorted the air around him. The Dominion soldiers fell back, stunned by the sheer intensity of it. The mechanized unit fired one last, desperate shot. But Evan was ready. He raised his hand, and with a single, powerful gesture, The blast disintegrated in midair. Then, with a roar that shook the very foundations of the planet, Evan unleashed his full power, sending a torrent of energy straight at the machine. The impact was cataclysmic. The mechanized unit crumbled under the force, its massive form collapsing in on itself in a fiery explosion. The shockwave rippled across the battlefield, sending Dominion forces scattering in retreat. Silence fell over the ruins. The Dominion was defeated. Evan stood at the center of the destruction, his body still humming with energy. The power within him had quieted, but he could feel it, always there, waiting. He turned to Sarala, who approached him with a soft smile. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with admiration. "You unlocked the power. You saved us." Evan exhaled, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of what had happened. "I couldn't have done it without you," he said, his voice low. "We did this together." Sarala stepped closer. The prophecy spoke of this day, but it didn't tell the whole story. It wasn't just about unlocking the power. It was about unlocking the bond between us. Evan met her gaze, feeling the truth of her words. The bond between them had been the key all along, not just to unlocking the power, but to surviving, to winning. "You were the real reward," he said quietly, the words slipping out before he could stop them. Sarala smiled, her eyes shining. "And you were mine," as her hand touched his shoulder, then slowly moved downward gently. In that moment, as the smoke cleared and the stars began to shine once more, Evan knew that their journey was only beginning. The power they had unlocked was only the start, and together they would face whatever the galaxy had to throw at them. But for now, they stood side by side, victorious. And for the first time in his life, Evan felt like he had found his place, not just as a protector, but as something more, something complete.